Awesome. Thank you very much. I really missed these. I mean, a year of COVID and we had so few of these conferences. Canada right now is a lot worse with COVID. I'm pretty sure our numbers are skyrocketed and our restrictions are quite high right now. But I'm probably the safest guy here because I've been tested so many times in the last month and a half. I'm getting tired of things getting stuck up my nose, I tell you that. But I'm excited to be here. I kind of got to give you a little bit of a warning right off the bat, though. I apologize to you because I might insult you a little bit today. Sometimes I can be a little bit blunt, and there's a few sensitive souls in the crowd usually that might get offended. So from the bottom of my heart, I am sorry. But that's like a get out of jail free card, right? Because now I can say whatever I want. So I don't work for anybody. I don't work for the government. I don't work for any companies. I'm pretty well free to say what I want. If you don't like what I have to say today, I'm perfectly okay with that. You can call my boss if you want, but I sleep with her. So, and you don't want to get on her bad side, I tell you that right now. So, he already read out our mission statement, but I think a mission statement is really important for a farm to have. Okay, economic and environmental sustainability for generations. That's a passion to me. And earlier today, we talked about passion and the passion in this industry and the passion in regenerative agriculture. I think that's where we have to go. We have to have a passion and a direction. And I'm very passionate about this regenerative ag movement, and it's growing and it's getting better. And look at the size of this crowd here today in the midst of a COVID pandemic, and everybody's still coming out, and I just love this to see this. So very important. We're going to talk about breaking paradigms today, and it's kind of one of my favorite words is the paradigm. We've been talking about it on and off for years. My wife and I like looking at that paradigm angle all the time. So she actually started a company. I think we're going to start the... So she started her own little company. She has some volume in there too, but she just makes me look good. There we go. There she is. Okay, so she got this passion for videography, and now it's matching really good because now she's promoting regenerative agriculture. And we were very careful about the title, Paradigm Productions. Did you guys notice the symbols there underneath her Paradigm Productions? You see that? It's 4 nickels. Do you get it? How do you break a paradigms? 4 nickels? Come on, that's good, isn't it? Oh, she didn't get it either. I insisted. She said, I want to name my company Paradigm Production. I was like, oh, you got to have 4 nickels. And she looked at me with this blank stare. My daughters are expert eye rollers, by the way. I've got a lot of these dad jokes that come out all the time. So yeah, the paradigms, that's a different way of looking at things, right? Doesn't have to be a paradigms. It could be 4 nickels. So we're going to look at that today and some of the ideas that I've come across in the last 20, 22 years of doing this. Right off the bat, something that's you might not know about me. Some people think it's kind of weird, but I don't own a tractor. Okay, I've been ranching for 22, 23 years, and I've never yet owned a tractor. We run 1,400 head during the summer. We usually have between 100 and 300 head during the winter, and I've never owned a tractor. I've never seen the need for one. I use a tractor once in a while. I'll hire my neighbor's tractor once in a while, but I love driving a tractor. Any farm kid loves driving a tractor, but I just don't want to have to pay for the thing and then pay for the repairs. So I do have a tracker, and if you've ever seen a tracker before, it's not a tractor, it's a tracker. It's my side-by-side. I think I've had 4 of these over the last number of years. I buy them cheap. They've got a windshield and a heater. This is my side-by-side, or this is my quad, and it works really good. And actually, the last one that I bought, it's the same thing, but it's actually called a Sidekick. The first one was a Chevy. This one's a Suzuki. They're the same thing. The parts are interchangeable. All the screws are the same. But my daughter says that I'm a superhero, because every superhero has a sidekick, right? Yeah? No? Okay. Okay. So I don't have a tractor. Everybody asks me, well, how do you get things done? Well, I've had a series of bale trucks. I think I'm on number 7 in my career. I use bale trucks all the time. So they're very useful. They're just a little bit different. I can still do just about everything you can with a tractor, but I can usually do it faster. So I really appreciate the bale trucks. So a little bit different. I do have a tractor on the farm. I can't lie to you, but there's trees growing through it. So, all right. So our business is a little bit different than most. We set up a custom grazing operation near Edmonton, Alberta. I'm actually a Saskatchewan boy. My family farm is in Saskatchewan by Lloydminster. And I started farming there, and then my dad and I didn't necessarily always get along 100%. And I wanted to put everything down into grass. I wanted perennial polycultures and be managing cattle, and he thought the land was supposed to be for canola and wheat and things like that. So I actually just started my own operation up by Edmonton, Alberta. We've now expanded to about 3,500 acres of leased land. We don't own the cattle and we don't own the land. Okay, I bought a quarter land, and cash flow was pretty tight. Pretty tough. I mean, that close to the city, it was a pretty expensive piece of land for what we're doing. And if you're trying to put food on the table and diapers on bums, boy, paying for land's pretty tough out of cash flow. And so we learned how to do a gross margin analysis. I actually went to the Ranching for Profit school way back then in 2001. And I figured out real quickly that my few custom cows that I brought in, because I had more land than I had cattle, I was actually making more money on my custom grazing than I was on my owned cattle. I'm like, what is that? That's crazy. And I did the numbers, and the most expensive part of my operation, the biggest cost to my cows was actually my grazing. Right? I had to pay for the pasture, and it was my pasture. But when you put the opportunity cost of I could bring in custom cattle at this rate, that's what I had to charge my animals. And it just proved without a doubt that I was making more money on my custom cattle. So I sold my cattle. And then I have something, in 2002 was the major drought, and 2003 BSE hit. And BSE hit a lot of farmers in Canada, not so much in the US, I don't think. But it really hit them in Canada, and a lot of farmers just quit. They quit doing cows, right? If they were mixed grain and cattle, they just quit. It wasn't worth it. The prices were not very good. So land became available. So here I am, just decided that I make more money custom grazing than I do on cattle, and so I started to pick up land. And it was pretty easy for the first few years. There was lots of land that was sitting there not being used, and I grew until about 2007. In 2007, all of a sudden, the grain industry got a big kick. Anybody remember what it was? The ethanol market opened up in the U.S. Okay, and if 40% of the U.S. corn crop goes into ethanol, even the Canadian grains all went up in price. So then all of a sudden, there was land, was a little more demand. And I started to lose some land, right? We're on the edge of the black soil zone and the gray wooded soil zone. So the black soil zone's all the grain farmers, and all the cattle guys are in the gray. And we're right on the edge. So, as the prices go up, the grain guys creep over and bid a little bit more for land. And so I did lose a few pieces, but honestly, it's part of the game, losing land, right? We all play that game, no? Okay, well, I actually built a game. It's called Greener Pastures Ranching. You can buy it. This isn't a sales pitch because I make no money on it. And there's one square that says bad neighbor. Take any piece of land from any other player. Kind of a mixture between Monopoly and farming game. So you can steal land in the game, and you can get some, you think Monopoly's bad? Yeah, start stealing land from your neighbor. But yeah, that happens, right? I've lost lots of land over the years. That's the issue with leasing it, right? Ownership is not, that's the paradigm. You don't always have to own everything. I started figuring out as I could expand, my cash flow was a lot better with leased land. Right? And let's say I had a piece of land, I had a $10,000 a year payment on it. If I rented it, I only had to pay $3,000. Right? My cash flow is a lot better, a lot easier to put food on the table and diapers on bums back then. So I had kind of a rule of thumb that every piece of land that I owned, I needed to lease about 10 to be able to have a positive cash flow of it. And that's an important part of my business is understanding the difference between the economics of something and being able to manage the finance side of it. Okay, that's two different sets of books. And we got to remember that, and we got to keep that clear. So that's the reason I went that way, and then I just kept expanding. And like I said, right now I think we're sitting at about 3,500 acres. We do own some property. It's still building in equity, and we're gaining that way, but the leased land is a lot more financially viable to be able to do it that way. Also, a risk factor. This year is an example. Right? Every time I keep thinking that, maybe I should buy cows again, we have a year like this, where there's a severe drought, the price of hay goes through the roof, and I'm glad I don't own cows. I also have something called the Animal Keepers Act. Now, I don't think you have it in the States. You might have a version of it in some states maybe, but the Animal Keepers Act for me is a legislative act in Canada. Every province has it. And if I don't get paid as an animal keeper, that's me, I'm taking care of someone's animals. If I don't get paid, I can sell their animals at auction and get my money. So it's a no-brainer for me. Do I take the risk of owning cows and then possibly having bad years that for a few years you make a little bit of profit, and then all of a sudden you have a bad year and you lose 7 years worth of profit? With the Animal Keepers Act, I'm guaranteed to get paid. Sometimes it's late. 2 summers ago, I had one customer that through him I had accounts receivable of about $38,000, but I had his animals still, right? That's a hard cash flow through the summer, and in the end, they paid me, right? I didn't let the animals go until they paid me, so I guaranteed I got paid. So it's a risk thing for me too. So a lot of people have this issue with me not owning cows. So why do I have to own cows? Did my mission statement say anything about owning cows? Right? I could own goats. I could own sheep. I don't have to own any of it. Did it say anything about me owning land? Okay, as an investment, land is a good investment. So I want to be doing that. The quote from Alan Nation, probably 20 years ago, I read it in his book. Land is a great investment with after-tax dollars. Okay, we don't need to be investing. You're trying to pay for land out of cash flow. That's a tough thing to do. I got a phone call from a fellow 3 days ago. He wants to buy a piece of land, and he heard about me, and he wants to know if I want to come in and manage it. Right? So it's word of mouth now. The people know that I do that, and they know the management that I do. That I'm going to improve it. That I'm going to make it better over time. Sometimes that's a downfall. The fact that people know that I improve land. I've got grain farmers that follow me around and try and buy land from my landowners. Okay, I've lost 9 quarters of land in the last 8 or 9 years because grain farmers come in. Usually somebody passes away and then the kids get it and then they sell it. But the grain farmers are real quick to swoop in and grab it because I've built up my land. Some of it I've been managing for 22, 23 years. Okay, it's in good shape. Boy, they rip it up and they get some good crops for the first couple of years. But I've been building it. They're going to mine it out in 2 or 3. Okay, so that's a risk I take. But human resources is one of the most important parts of my business. Being able to hold on to that land is tough, right? With the other people around, or the demand for land and the grain farmers wanting it, they're bidding more for it than I'm paying. But I build a relationship with them. Right, it's almost like a family. I've got landowners I've had for 20 years. They consider my kids their grandkids. Okay, that's a relationship I've built up. And the one trick that I've found is I need to be in my landowner's ear more than my neighbor is. Okay, because my neighbor's probably going to complain about me and put me down to my landowners because they want the land. So I need to give an argument to my landowners. This is why my fence is crooked. This is why I don't worry about that little patch of weeds in the corner. This is why my crop doesn't look perfect. Okay, that's why it's not a perfect monoculture, is because these are the reasons. I'm trying to build ecosystems. I'm trying to have environments for insects and predators. So I need to make sure that my landowners know all those things so that when my neighbors come over and complain about me, my landowner has ammo. Okay, that's how we keep the land and we keep those relationships built. So it's not as big of a deal. Right, I do lose some land, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. If I lose land, I'm going to gain some other times. The funnest part of my job is when I get to take over grainland. That's fun. So, okay. So the land paradigm, I don't have to own the land, okay? But we also have a soil paradigm that I've learned over the years. Academia, when I went to college, they taught me that it takes 100 years to grow an inch of topsoil. Okay, that's what I was taught. I actually talked to a leading researcher at the university in Alberta about 2 months ago, and they quoted that. They told me, this is a leading researcher who's actively doing research in the university, and they quoted that to me, that it takes over 100 years to grow an inch of soil. I'm like, no it doesn't. So I have to teach the leading researchers. How's that going to work? Now, there's some out there, don't get me wrong. Tomorrow we got a rock star coming here. Is she here yet? Dr. Chris Nichols? She's one of my rock stars. I talk about the regenerative agriculture rock stars, and she's one of them. So there's some absolutely fantastic scientists out there as well, but there's some that just are in the old school. Dr. Christine Jones was the first one that opened my eyes and broke this paradigm for me. She talks about the liquid carbon pathway, and if you ever get a chance to listen to her or look into that. But she introduced me to a really good friend of mine. Okay, she was the first person that introduced me to Jean-Baptiste von Helmont. Okay, he's like my BFF now, my best friend forever. Well, I don't know him very well. But if he was alive when I'm alive, we'd be buds, because he challenged the norm, the common belief. So Dr. Jones actually introduced me to her. So I'm going to tell you the story that she told a little bit here. In 1634, he questioned the modern thinking of society. Okay, he wanted to know how plants grow. And he actually got thrown in jail for his results, for his conclusions. So I'll tell you the little story here. That was the question, how do plants grow? And at the modern thinking of the time was that plants grow from eating the soil, right? You put a plant in the soil, it grows, it uses up nutrients, and then you harvest the plant and you take it away. So the plant is growing from the soil, right? So he did an experiment. So in his words, he took a large earthen pot, so a big flower pot, dug a hole in the ground, put that pot in there, took some soil, and he dehydrated it, so he dried it out, and he used 200 pounds worth of soil. Okay, he put that in the large earthen pot, put a fine screen over top of it so the wind couldn't blow soil in or out, and then he planted a willow tree, just a little sapling. And then he watered it. And then every time it needed water, he watered it. His experiment went on for 5 years. Okay, and at the end of 5 years, he had this willow tree that grew. He didn't account for any of the leaves falling off. That wasn't in his experiment, so that was something that he missed a little bit. But at the end of 5 years, he took out the large earthen pot, took out the tree, and weighed it. There was something like 178 pounds of wood that was created, roots and bark and branches and things. 178 pounds. Then he took the soil out, and he dehydrated it again, and he had almost exactly 200 pounds of soil. So nothing went missing. So his conclusions were that plants grow from water, right? Because that's the only thing he added to the soil was water. Was he right? He was thrown in jail because of his conclusions, because the modern thinking of the time was that plants grow from the soil, and he proved that it doesn't. So where do plants grow from? Living organisms. We need them from the sun, close, from the air. Plants grow from the air. Okay? Carbon. So on a dry matter basis, every plant, every weed, every thistle, every tree is made up of approximately 45% carbon, 45% oxygen, 6% hydrogen, and 1.5% nitrogen. Okay? Every single one of those comes from the air. That's 97.5% of every plant comes from the air. Why are we so worried about what's in the soil? Okay, he proved that plants don't grow from the soil, right? You don't need soil to grow a plant. 2.5% we need from the soil. I'll give you that, 2.5%. But that's a pretty small number. Okay. I think he was thrown in jail for this, right? I think more people today should be thrown in jail for what they do to their soil. Is that fair? Okay. So I don't know if you can see this very well. This is a piece of I dug a hole at home on one of our pastures. There are little triangles that come down. There's a triangle right there. There's a triangle right there. So what we need to focus on is carbon sequestration. And I think that's something that's missing in our industry right now. Agriculture is on this, where the urban population is pushing us to this climate issue, and we got to take carbon out of the air. And everybody's worried about reducing emissions. Okay, we need to do carbon sequestration. We have the ability to do that. So what happens here is the plants pull carbon out of the air, which is a good thing. They translocate through the plant, and they turn it into glucose, and the roots can push out the glucose into the soil and actually grow soil. Okay, that's what's happening here. There was a root system reaching down here. There's a root system reaching down here. And it's actually converting the soil. So academia, who says it takes 100 years to grow an inch of topsoil, is relying on leaving residue on the surface and having it break down and turn into soil, right? That's a really slow process. Okay? If we can use the root exudates, push it down into the ground, we're converting the clay, the sand, or the silt, whatever your combination is. We're adding organic matter to it, and we're converting it into soil. Okay? I've proven that we can grow 3 to 4 inches of topsoil in 12 years. So that's at least an inch a year. Okay. How do we grow soil? We can leave residue like academia thinks. We can have root decay, right? Have the roots break down and actually leave organic matter down there. Or we can use the exudate. And if we're focusing on using the exudate, it's a lot faster, right? There's no way it's going to take us 100 years if we can do it. Okay. We need the plants, and we need the soil organisms, and we need the livestock in there to do it. Okay, and I'm going to touch a little bit more on that later on. Okay, but we have the ability to grow soil. And that was my big paradigm that was broken, is that I thought it takes a long time to grow soil. But it doesn't. We can do it a lot faster. And that's where the thinking comes in. Okay, so we were part of a study. It was across the prairies in Canada. They had 30 different locations and 60 farms. And it was a carbon sequestration study. And I don't have all the results quite back yet. They're still working on getting my own personal results back. But this was my field, and this was the neighbor's field. Okay. They called it AMP, so I don't really care what the terminology is. I'm not hung up on terminology. Adaptive multi-paddock grazing, whatever you guys want to call it, you can. But that was the term they used, so that's what I used. So my field and their field, and if you took soil samples of them, so the background to these pieces, the reason they chose them is the history was pretty similar. We're in a gray wooded soil zone, so very clay-based. If you tear up the soil to build a house or something, and it rains, your rubber boots get to be about 30 or 40 pounds each, right? That clay just sticks to your feet. They call it the Busby clay, and very, very solid clay. But it was developed under leaf litter because it used to be forest. And 50 years ago, it was bulldozed. So we end up with this clay, and then it was just grazed for so many years. So both of these pieces of land had never been tilled. They were bulldozed and left 40 or 50 years ago. And then 12 years before these pictures were taken, I had taken over one of them and started doing regenerative grazing. Okay? So that was the difference. The only difference was the topography was the same. They're kitty corner from one another, so they're same rainfall, same everything. Theirs is full of buttercup and Canada thistle every summer. It's the place where I stop every year on the pasture walk and say, okay, this is the neighbor's field and this is my field. So that's the comparison. And that was us way up there in Alberta. We're the very top left-hand one. So they did the study all across. And this is the two soil samples from the two different pieces. Okay, I mean, we talked earlier, at the rainfall simulator about the color of the soil. Okay. After 12 years, I'm sitting at just over 10% organic matter, and they're sitting at under 4. Okay, so that's 12 years. I've changed that whole profile. The AH layer, or the A horizon layer now in there, is anywhere between about 3 inches and 22 inches deep. Okay, we've completely changed that profile in just 12 years. Okay, so it's not as difficult as what some people think. Okay. So carbon sequestration, we need photosynthesis, right? That pulls it out of the air. We need exudation to push it into the soil. And then we need the soil biology to convert it. Earlier today they talked about mycorrhizae fungi and turning it into glomalin. Very important process in storing that. We are probably the only industry on the planet, okay, that has the ability to sequester more carbon than we emit. Think about any other industry, right? The automotive industry. They're never going to get to carbon neutral, right? They're not. With all their manufacturing, the processing, and the transportation and the hauling, they're not going to do it. The forestry industry is close. They might be able to get to it, but it's not stable, right? A forest fire can come along. You can spend 80 years sequestering carbon. One forest fire comes along and boom, it releases it. In our agriculture industry, we're the only one that has the ability to sequester more carbon than we emit, long-term stable carbon. Okay, I think that's something that we should be proud of, and we should be bragging about that and pushing that. The problem is we're not. Okay, we have the ability, but we're not doing it. If you're trying to prevent your cows from burping in the feedlot and you're going to haul seaweed from the coast all the way across, you really think that's net carbon? Right? I don't think so. I don't think so. We need to figure it out. Our advantage is the soil and the plants, right? We need to take the plants and add the carbon. If I'm talking to my urban cousins, okay, I'm pulling carbon out of the air for you. That's my job. If I'm talking to farmers, you should put carbon in your soil because that's a good thing. Okay, depending on your perspective. What are you trying to accomplish? We do them both. But what's your priority? Okay, so another example. So this is the same piece of land on the right-hand side here. It's got those little triangles dipping down where the root systems were. And 10 miles down the road is the black soil zone. We just planted 3 years ago perennial grains. So we have kerns of wheat, perennial wheat. So you're supposed to be able to plant it for 4 or 5 or maybe 6 years, and you'll be able to harvest the wheat off of it. But it's a perennial plant, and we had ACE1 perennial rye, which was also in there. So we planted that in there. So we were really excited about looking at root systems, and I dug down in it. But what I found, I wasn't as impressed at the roots, but what I saw was the soil. Okay, I said we're right on the black soil zone, on the edge of it. Like a black soil zone, right? That's the good stuff. That's where all the grain farmers are. And I went to the manager. I said, when we dig the hole, though, we don't want to make the grain farmer mad. So when we dig, what we should do is take the topsoil first, put it in a pile over here, and then when we get the clay, because these roots are supposed to go down 6 feet, I wanted to go deep, get the clay, we should put it over here. And then when we put it back in, we should put it back in the same order, right? That makes sense? We couldn't tell the difference. We couldn't figure out where the A horizon ended and where the clay started. It was all the same color, all the way through. And that's the good black soil zone. Okay, I'm in the gray wooded soil zone, and I got 12 inches of deep black topsoil there. Something wrong with this situation, and this is zero till. This is the best management you can get in the conventional thinking. Okay, they're missing the root systems. They're missing that polyculture. They're missing that, root growth as long as possible in a season. 200 days of growth. They're only getting 90 days or 100 days of growth. They're not building the soil. Okay, they're mining it. So we've got to change that thinking. So which one's the black soil zone? That's my confusion there. Okay, so we don't want to just get to carbon neutral. Right? I want to get to carbon negative. I know it sounds backwards, but carbon negative is a good thing. Carbon positive is the bad way. But I want to go past that. We did a study probably about 6 or 7 years ago. We did an online calculator. My wife sat down and did most of it. I kind of gave her the details when we had to, but it took us all afternoon. I'm not saying it's 100% scientifically proven. It was from the UK, so did that match what Canada's environment is? Probably not. But even if I'm out by 25% or more, okay, our farm came back at 94% sequestration and 6% emissions. Okay, so our farm, our farm itself is run off grid. We've got solar panels, so we've got that. But there's battery disposal, which we included in the calculation. Wood heat, which how much wood you burned was included in the situation. But it also talked about the propane and the fuel you burn. Right? We don't have a tractor. We run. I think that year we calculated that we burned, I think about $18,000 worth of fuel, petroleum, and without a tractor, we didn't burn any diesel then, but 94%. Even if I'm out by 24%, okay, said our industry is the only one that can be carbon negative. We can get beyond carbon neutral. That footprint that the urban population is aiming at, we can do it. And my challenge to you is, are you? Can you do it? And even if you've got the grain farming, that's great. We can do it there. I'm working with a grain farmer. We're trying to build up his soil as well. Okay, we're putting polycultures in. We're putting cover crops in. We're trying to get the livestock out on the land to recycle it. We can go beyond carbon neutral. So, what about all the other elements? Okay, carbon's just one. Have you guys ever seen this barrel? I used to see it all the time at the fertilizer dealers. The law of the minimum. Now, it was created by Justin von Liebig, however you say his name. He probably wouldn't have been one of my best friends back then. But the law of the minimum is basically what it says is your crop will only grow to the point at which the most limiting nutrient, right, or the weakest link. Do you guys know what the most important nutrient is on that barrel? What was that? Water. It's leaking out of the barrel. Why would they do this? Why? This is just hilarious to me. The most important nutrient is leaking out of the barrel. Anybody see the rainfall simulator? How much runs off? What's running off here? It's telling me there's a problem with this system. And a lot of farmers will go, water's not a nutrient, you can't take that. Well, carbon is an element, right? What's hydrogen and what's oxygen? They're two elements. They make up over 50% of the plant on a dry matter basis. Pretty important to have water. I was at a conference here probably 10 years ago. It was a grain conference. And the speaker stood up there and he said, for every 50 pounds of nitrogen you need, right? If your soil test says you require 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre to grow X number of bushels or X number of pounds of forage, and equivalent to that 50 pounds of nitrogen, you need 10,000 pounds of water. What's the most important nutrient? Water, by far. It's the only nutrient I manage. I do not manage nitrogen. I do not manage anything else. Just water. That's my whole goal. You guys ever had a drought? Sorry, I had to say it. Yeah, no, the drought's been pretty widespread. It was all across everywhere, I think, this year. But yeah, water is the most important nutrient. And that's something I was never taught. It's a paradigm that got broken. I was taught you have to manage what? N, K, P, and S. Okay, that's what we got to manage. So, that water makes up over 51% of that 97.5. Okay, what about nitrogen? Did you guys know that the air we breathe is over 78% nitrogen? Every breath you take right now is 78% nitrogen, between 75 and 78%. Why would you ever buy any? How did this ever become a thing? It baffles me, absolutely blows my mind. How did we ever get to where we had to buy nitrogen? It's free. Every breath you take, you can have it. Now everybody wants, to get it, you have to have legumes, right? Because legumes produce nitrogen? No, wrong. It's actually the bacteria associated with the legume that does it. There is a underground black market. You guys knew that? There's this constant trading going on back and forth. It's controlled by the mob. Okay, the mob is the plants. Okay, the reason they control this underground black market is because they control the currency. The currency is sugar. Every living organism in the soil needs sugar to survive. So there's a bacteria that's associated with the legume that can pull nitrogen out of the air, and they take that nitrogen to the plant saying, here's a molecule of nitrogen, give me a molecule of sugar. Okay, and there's this constant bartering back and forth of products. So if your plants need something, well, there's a bacteria or a fungus or some kind of critter out there that will get it for them. And it's all traded in this black market with the currency of sugar, right? So it's actually not the legume that gets the nitrogen. It's the bacteria associated with them that do it. Okay, and there's other bacteria in there as well, not necessarily, they don't have to be associated with a legume, but that's the most common one we know. Okay, so it's a paradigm that we have to buy fertilizer, right? Especially nitrogen. I can't fathom that. I haven't bought any fertilizer for 23 years. And back then, I kind of got forced into doing it. So not something that I want to do. Okay, what about all the other nutrients? I stole this slide from Dr. Joel Williams. If you ever get a chance to see him, he's another one of our rock stars. Just a few examples. There's a big difference between available nutrients and actual nutrients. Okay, ask yourself, why is it unavailable? Why can't we access it? Because there's some huge numbers here. Calcium, 5,000 available. So this is, sorry, it's Canadian, it's metric, so it doesn't really matter. Look at the percentages, milligrams per kilogram. But 5,000 to 39,000. There's another page here. There's KS&P. Phosphorus, 23 available, but 434 that's actually there. Okay, why can't we access it? What's missing? Here's another one, zinc, magnesium, iron, copper. Okay, it's all the same thing. There's so much there. There are multiple lifetimes of nutrients in your soil. It's already there. You just can't get it. Do you know why you can't get it? You need biology. Dr. Christine Jones, in one of the sessions that she did not too long ago, she was talking about nitrogen and how nitrogen moves in the soil. And she said that all the research in the past 50 years done on nitrogen mobilization in the soil should be thrown out. All of it. Because it's been done in dead soils. It's a completely different dynamic when you get a live, living, vibrant soil full of microbiology. Okay? That's what's missing. We don't have a fertility problem in agriculture at all. We have a biological problem. We've killed the soils. Okay? Like I said, I haven't bought fertilizer in 22 years. We don't need it. There's plenty of it out there. Okay? 85 to 90% of plant nutrition is microbiotically mediated. Okay? We don't need to be buying it. It's there. So let's look at that 97.5. Let's talk about nutrient recycling now. I like math. Do you guys okay with math? Anyone do some math? Okay, let's do some math. If we bring in 97.5% every time you grow a plant, okay, so every season you're bringing in 97.5% from the air. It's new. And livestock come and recycle that for us. Livestock are very inefficient. Right? 80% of what comes in the front end goes out the back end, in the urine and the manure. Okay, so if we're going to take that 80% of 97.5% is 78%. So every year I'm grazing, I'm inputting 78% of the nutrients that my land needs. How can you not grow soil with that scenario? You're bringing in 78%. Okay, now of the 2.5% that I need from the soil, right, all those other micronutrients, and by the way, every other nutrient is less than 1%, and most of them are measured in parts per million, very small amounts that we need. So of that 2.5%, if I recycle 80% of that, right, we're pulling it out of the soil, but we're putting 80% of it back, now we've got 2% recycled. Okay? So we only need to input 0.5% of the nutrients of what a plant needs. Would that be cheaper? Cheaper than buying fertilizer? Okay, that's easy to do. I can do that with a mineral block. Okay, so we've got 78% inputs and 0.5% exported. Now, I know that's not scientific. That's redneck farmer math. I understand that. But do you get the point? We can grow soil. We don't have to be buying inputs all the time. So how do we do that? We have to manage it. We've got to all of a sudden start looking at how we're managing the land. Okay? There's lots of different schools on grazing. How are we doing for time? 10 minutes? Okay. There's some basic principles. Now, I'm a regenerative grazer. I don't do much for cropland, so there's different principles, there's different schools of thought. I know the principles that I've heard here are a little bit different, but they're all the same. Right? I'm not hung up on whose method we're using. So I've taken mine from a blend from everybody that I've learned from over the last 25 years. So I'm going to talk to you about 5 grazing principles, and I can talk to you about 5 grazing concepts. Okay, that's what I go on my basis, because I'm a grazer, not a farmer. So the water cycle is the number one principle. If I could fix the water cycle, everything else comes. Right? If I can fix that water cycle, the biology comes, the fertility comes, it just works. That's why bale grazing is such a no-brainer for me. I can instantly fix the water cycle with bale grazing. A lot of people talk about bale grazing with the added nutrients from all the manure and the urine and the hay that's left over. Really? I don't think it's the nutrients. Right? Nutrients gets used up. It's the repair of the water cycle that really is the big benefit for that lasts forever. Once you get the water cycle working, then the microbes come in and the fertility comes, and then it's just a self-sustaining system. Okay? Because I can unroll bales on a piece of land, and it'll be dirty, filthy, and manure and urine everywhere, and within 3 or 4 years, it fades back down again. Because we added fertility, we didn't add the residue, we didn't add the carbon, and then that fertility gets used up, and then it's back to where it was. But if we can add the carbon to build the system and get the water, that fixes it. Sunlight harvesting. I want to harvest as much sunlight as I possibly can. Okay, the sunlight travels, 90 million miles to get here? Don't waste it in the last 6 inches. Don't let it reflect back. There's a term called albedo. That's the amount of light that's coming down versus what gets reflected back. Okay, pretty neat measurement to see how efficient you are at actually harvesting or keeping those sunbeams. Now that's different than libido, just so you're aware. Okay, albedo. Nutrient cycling, we've talked about that. It is so important on my operation to try and recycle those nutrients to build up that soil and keep it growing and keep it going. And most of our agricultural processes are just exporting all the time, right? In a grain situation, you're exporting nutrients all the time. In a hay operation, you're constantly exporting that nutrients off your land. Okay, is there a way that you can figure out on your land, on your system, that you can still make a profit out of it but not export the nutrients? Right? Even part of it. Right? If you're a grain guy, yes, we need grain, but can you get livestock integrated on your land? Maybe you don't like livestock. Well, you know what? There's a lot of people here that do. Right? We can work and form partnerships together and have some, I think it's very important that we have livestock on that land. Every acre of grain land needs a fence around it. If the government wants to subsidize something, boy, that would be a big one, just to get the animals back out there. Some young producers that want to manage some cattle, to be able to go out and actually afford to put that fence around someone else's land, that's a big chunk of change to throw out. Right, and a risk. So that's where we're sitting. We need to be able to get those fences out there. Oops, I bumped it. Building biology, boy, I could go forever. I could talk all day long on building biology, from the insects to the microbiology. red velvet mites and dung beetles, and I've got all sorts of stuff I could talk on that. I'm not an entomologist, but I probably should have been, but I'm just very passionate about that. Part of my whole system is building biology. I'll create riparian areas just to give the breeding grounds for dragonflies. Okay, that's an important part to me is building those riparian areas. So, the polyculture. One of my favorite quotes, Gabe Brown years ago came up to Edmonton, and here I thought he was this crop farmer that was coming up to invade our grazing conference, and I was like, oh, who's this guy? Boy, he had one of the best presentations I've seen in a long time. And the one quote that really stood out that I saw that I think 95% of the people in the room don't see, because he's got all sorts of interesting things in his presentation, but the one I really like is nothing grows soil faster than a well-managed perennial polyculture. Okay, that's the well-managed perennial polyculture. You've got, the full season length of roots growing in your soil. Okay, you don't have just a short growing season. You don't have any time where that light is being reflected. So that perennial polyculture to me is a no-brainer. And we've got to get that more into the cropping side as well. I'm really trying to work at reaching that side as well now, and that's an important part, that polyculture. Okay, so that is the why I do what I do. The how is the grazing concepts themselves. So basically the graze period, rest period, they work together. Graze period has to be short enough so that they're not taking a second bite, but the rest period has to be long enough so we get full recovery. Okay, so they have to work together. The simplest and quickest way I can explain that is everybody knows how to make good hay, right? We let the hay crop grow. It gets to about late stage 2. You don't want it to go to seed, but you want it as big and as bulky as you possibly can. And then you cut it in a day. And hopefully you get it baled up nicely. And then you let it grow again. Okay, that's all I'm doing with my graze period, rest period. But I have a whole bunch of little fields. And I can't park my equipment in the shed for 2 months and wait for it to grow. So I have to stagger it so that every little field I can use the cattle to have that short graze period and a long rest period to get it to full recovery. Okay, so that graze period, rest period is important. Now your rest period can change, so can your graze period. It depends on your environment. Right? If you're a really dry environment, you're going to have a longer rest period. If you're in a really wet environment, you can have a shorter one. So those two work together. Animal impact. Okay, animal impact there's 2 parts to animal impact. There's the physical stimulation on the soil by the animal's hooves. So, right, their hoof print steps on the ground. It can break cap soil. It can create seed to soil contact. It can actually push the material down to touch the soil, and then it'll recycle faster. Okay, so that animal impact's important, that physical animal impact. The other part to it is actually the biological impact. Okay, there's symbiotic relationships between the biology of the herbivore and the biology of the soil. Right? There's biology in the manure, there's biology in the urine, there's biology in the snot that comes out of their nose, in the saliva that comes out when they're grazing. There's biology that falls off their hair coat. Okay, we need that biology out there. It's something that a set of harrows can't do. Right? So to get that biology out there, we need that animal impact. Stock density. 2 benefits to stock density. So the higher your stock density, really high would be mob grazing, or like ultra high stock density, whatever the term is you use. And the bottom end would be continuous grazing, where they're just turned out. So somewhere on your property, somewhere on that scale between there's an economic threshold that's best for your farm, your pasture. Right? Just because someone else does one density doesn't mean it works for you. So we've got to make sure we manage that. So the benefits of high stock density, one is even plant utilization. So basically, high stock densities, they eat or knock down everything. Low stock densities, they pick and choose. Okay, so we want to be closer to where they're knocking everything down. And the other benefit is more even manure distribution. So manure and urine get spread out better. Okay, in a continuous grazing situation, you end up with manure and urine around the watering area, around the trees. In your case, maybe the tree. Okay? Can you hear the wind? Yeah, I can hear the wind. Yeah, sorry. Well, I come from lots of trees. Originally I come from Saskatchewan, where I could hear this all the time in Saskatchewan. And then I moved up to Edmonton. I'm like, oh, it's so nice and peaceful without the wind. So anyway, Oops, I keep bumping the button, sorry. And lastly is soil armor. That soil armor is so important to get that water. Okay, water is the only nutrient I manage. Do you know when the best time to plan for a drought is? Long before the drought, 10 years ago. Okay, you know when the worst time to plan for a drought is? In the drought, during a drought. Okay, best advice I was ever given was by Dennis Wabasser. A great mentor of mine. He passed away a number of years ago, but back in 2002, their area went through 14 months with zero precipitation. Right? He's the best grazer I know. Guess what his land looked like? Brown and grazed off, right? It was done. 14 months with no precipitation. This is not drought proofing something, it's drought resilience. And I asked him, I remember I went up to him that day and I asked him, well, what do you do now? And his immediate answer, he didn't even hesitate, is now we plan for the next drought. Okay, so since then, I've been planning for a drought. So the land that I manage now, some of it I've been managing for over 20 years, every year planning for this drought that just hit us. Do you want to know the results? I've got 2 pieces of pasture. The quick version of it, I've got a newer pasture that we've only had for about 3 years. I've got an older pasture that I've been managing for 20 years. They're 5 miles apart. Same rain, same everything this year, pretty well, same management. On the one that I've been grazing for 3 years, we got about 62% of the production this year compared to the average on the last couple years. 62%. So it was in a drought. Okay? And our drought was just under 4 inches of rainfall when normally we get 15. Okay? So that's quite a drastic difference, right? The land that I've been managing for 20 years, we got 94% of the average. So that land was not in a drought. Same situation, right? But we've been planning for this drought for 20 years, and it wasn't in a drought. So that, to me, is a success. I'm very happy with that pasture. It's doing great. And now, well, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to plan for the next drought. I'm going to work on building up more soil armor and building water holding capacity, okay? Because it's going to come again. Okay. So there's all sorts of schools on thought on grazing. Right? There's all sorts of pasture preachers out there. I might be one of them, right? We're teaching our own principles and our own terminology. It doesn't matter. As long as you got the basic understanding, the basic concepts behind you, then we need to adjust and change. There's no recipe, right? If you're following a pasture preacher that's got a recipe, I think you should follow somebody else. Because everybody's right in their own context, but I think change is a tool. Sometimes I'll graze with a very high stock density to stimulate it. Other times I'll go with a low stock density. Right? Sometimes we can change the stock. We can change the direction of our rotation. We can change maybe mix the class of livestock or mix species together. Right? Nature never grazed the same year after year after year. I think change is one of our tools. We have to do it. Okay, we've got to adjust it. So I do everything sometimes. I don't follow one school of thought because one year I'll have a 35-day rest on this piece of land. The next year I'll have a 70-day rest on it. Okay, throw in a small percentage of horses into your cattle herd. Boy, that sure changes the animal impact and the movement of the herds. Okay, change is a tool, and I think we need to do that. So that's a paradigm we get stuck in, right? We get into this new paradigm of regenerative grazing, and this is how I learned how to do it, and we get stuck in a new paradigm, right? I think we got to keep our minds open even when we jump out of them. So that's my advice for you, is to not get stuck in a new paradigm either. Okay, we can break out of one paradigm and then just get stuck right in the other one. So I think I'm out of time. I'll leave you with that. If you want to follow me, we've got a Facebook and a YouTube page. And for fun, if anybody wants to, it's absolutely free. We do a Wednesday night networking. We're pretty well, we all look like the Muppets when we're on the Zoom, right? Isn't that, yeah? So, but it's free. We're doing it every second Wednesday, and it's an absolute hoot. If you want to come on there, it's just networking. There's no presentation, so you're welcome to join us. And thank you very much.
Carbon sequestration, you talk about carbon negative. So when you take a piece of ground that's at 4% and you grow it to 10% organic matter, does it ever become does it come to a certain point where you're carbon neutral? Or let me say it this way, virgin prairie that's never been touched and is just growing, is that carbon neutral, or is that still sequestering carbon? It's releasing carbon as it breaks down. Do you come to a point where you are no longer?
Yeah, I'm not a scientist, but how deep can you grow your soil? Right? I mean, they talk about having 3 feet of topsoil in places 100 years ago, and now we've depleted them down to nothing. Right? So I think we got a long way to go. I mean, I grew, 6 to 12 inches there in 12 years. So can I go deeper? Yeah, I think so. We're going to get different root systems, and we're going to keep growing. But it's a cycle. Okay, it's a cycle. Everything's a cycle. There is no such thing as a water shortage, or there's no such thing as too much carbon. Right? Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It's a law of physics. It cannot be destroyed. So it's not that we've got too much of it or not enough of it. It's that it's out of balance, right? The cycle's been broken. We got too much in one part and not enough in another part. So if we get to that point where I can't add any more carbon to my soil, I'm pretty happy with that, because now we're in balance, right? So I don't think we're going to do it forever, no, but I think we can definitely do it for, another 100 years. So, yeah.
All right, Barry?
I think I'm on. You wrote a Facebook post that ended up on Everything Cover Crops.
Okay.
Were you surprised at the outraged and angry post replies you got?
That's fun. That's fun. I can't remember which one, but what was it about? I get a lot of people mad at me.
About the idea that we need livestock integrated in the Corn Belt.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one. I just think, how did we go so wrong? I drive down through southern Alberta. There's these massive, massive fields, wide open, no trees, and no fences, but the stench of the feedlot that I can't even see is in the air. Right? How did we go so wrong? Right? That land so desperately needs manure and urine and animal impact and biology on it, but we're not doing it. And it boggles my mind how we got to this point. And I'm not going to say I can fix it, but boy, I'm out here trying. Yeah.
I like how you don't avoid conflict, Steve. Do you think, or have you heard anybody discussing growers that use tillage and farm conventionally ever having to buy carbon credits from growers that are not using tillage to offset their emissions?
So basically, tillage is bad, right? It's releasing carbon, so that's, I don't know about the carbon credits very much, so I'm not necessarily going to be able to answer your question on that. But I'm not going to say you can't do tillage to be regenerative, okay? My definition of regenerative agriculture is that we grow soil from the plants, whereas modern agriculture grows plants from the soil. Okay, that's the easiest way for me to describe it. So you can till as long as your organic matter is going up and you're building the soil, and there's other things involved as well. Building biodiversity, is your soil health there? But there's certain practices that are detrimental to our soil health. It's detrimental to sequestering carbon, right? I agree. But do we have to eliminate them 100%? No, I don't think so, right? For an example, I got a neighbor who's an organic farmer. He does a rotation of 2 years of cropping, like oats. I think mostly oats he grows. And then he does 7 years of alfalfa. Okay? So he's got 7 years of perennial polyculture, growing soil. And then he's got 2 years where he works it up, and is he gaining? I think so, right? 2 years out of 9. So I'm not totally against tillage, but it's got to be used properly. Brendan Rocky, potato farmer out of Colorado. If you've ever heard him speak, he's an amazing presenter. I just loved it. First time I heard him speak was actually in Montana. It was him and I were the keynote speakers at this session. So I'm going down there. Here's Steve Kenyon with regenerative grazing and Brendan Rocky, a potato farmer. I'm like, oh, this is so not going to go well. Tillage, chemicals, like, oh, this is so not going to go well. We're going to contradict each other, and we're going to be in a fight at the end probably. And wow, what a great presentation he did. And I 100% agree, he's a regenerative farmer. But he's building the soil. He's growing polycultures not only in between his potato rotation, but in his potato crop. He's got 6 different species he's growing with his potatoes. He still tills. He's got to get those potatoes out of the ground, right? But I would attest he's a regenerative farmer. So I don't know if I answered or avoided your question good enough there, but okay. I don't remember what it was, but I went on a roll, so.
What was the name of your friend from Colorado?
Brendan Rocky Farms.
How do you spell Rocky?
Rock with a Y, I think. Maybe there's an E, I don't know. My 13-year-old is my spelling nerd, so don't ask me spelling. But yeah, if there is a recorded of his presentation though at the 2019 Western Canadian Soils and Grazing Conference, we recorded and it is online if you can Google that or search that. I think he was on day 2. Really good presentation. He calls himself a biotic farmer instead of an antibiotic farmer. Okay.
Steve, what are you seeing for impact from your hogs and your pigs?
Oh, the hogs. Interesting. They do a lot of natural tillage. Don't drive across my hog field very fast. Okay, it gets really rough. I try and move them before they get too much damage to the land. The pigs actually like the broadleafs the best, so they'll eat the dandelions and the clovers and the alfalfas first, and then if you force them there to eat the grass, they want to root underneath and eat the roots of the grass. They don't really like the grass. So I try and move them before they get to that point, but on wet years, that's really hard to do because they just love to root anyway, right? So the drier it is, the less they do, and then as they get bigger, once they get over 120, 130 pounds, boy, they can root pretty hard. The big thing I saw the difference though, we did some soil tests on a whole bunch of different pieces of land here in the last couple of years. And the pig pasture, what was glaring from the soil test result is the high phosphorus. Most of the tests came back at 17 or 21 or 25 maybe, whatever measurements. The hog pasture was over 80, right? So because we're bringing in a grain supplement, we're constantly adding to that land. And yeah, I think I need to move it before we get out of balance. We'll go to a new